Before we start this video, a large thank you to Jason, Nicholas, and Yuki for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Hello everybody, today we're going to add a death event to our project. So first I'm going to start by organizing the project and dragging the scripts into their proper folders to stay on top of that. And next I am actually going to create a new folder inside the scripts. This one's going to be for the animator because this reset is jumping is actually on an animation state. So let's keep it in its own folder for other animator scripts. I'm then going to make another script for colliders because now we have a damage collider. In the future, we're going to have a lot of different types of colliders, mostly damage colliders, but still. And then I'm going to go into art, animations, into the humanoid folder, and then I'm going to make another folder for damage. So I'm going to drag in the death animation that comes with the straight sword animation set. You can also get one in the spear animation set and the bow animation set, and you can also easily find one for free on Mixamo. So I will link all of those options in the description. If you don't have to set it up, set your rig to humanoid if your avatar is a humanoid and you want to create the model from the proper model. Some animations will have it create from this model, but mine is with the low poly man avatar that comes with the animations. And you can see here, it will play the animation. So also, if you're setting up from scratch, my animation settings are root transform position original and root transform position Y original and center of mass unchecked, and it makes it look like this. You can kind of play around with it and play in the preview to see how the animation behaves by changing these settings because not all animations are the same. Next, I am going to drag it into the animation window, change it to dead_01 and make no transition back to the empty state because when you play the death animation, you kind of want to be stuck in it. You don't want to be able to go back to the empty state. So next, let's go over into the character manager script and let's open that up. So we're going to make our first function, our actual function on the script. It's going to be called, it's going to be a virtual I enumerator, so a coroutine. And you can call it process death event or just handle death event or just death event, whatever name makes the most sense to you. This is going to run when the character's HP reaches 0. So we're going to say if we are the owner, because we only want to run this portion of logic on the owner, we're going to set our current HP to 0 just in case it goes below 0 for whatever reason. I just like doing that. Not really necessary, but again, I like doing it. Then we're going to say is dead.value is equal to true. And then right below that, let's make a comment for some future code. We want to reset any flags here that need to be reset. So maybe you died in the middle of attack and you have the is attacking flag is true. Let's turn that off there. And then there's nothing there yet, so I'm going to make another comment to say that. And then right below that, we can add some more logic and some more pseudocode. We could say if we are not grounded, we want to play the aerial death animation. So let's say you die in the air, you want to play like a tumble into a falling and then a landing animation. We don't have that yet, but we're going to implement that as well. So make a comment there. That will be implemented in a future video. And let's make a bool for manually select death animation, but let's automatically initialize it to false. Why? If you automatically assign it, if you didn't know, if you don't put anything in the brackets when you call this function, it will automatically select false for you. So let's say in some certain instances you want to actually have a manual death animation, you can override the regular death animation. If not, we say if we're not manually selecting our death animation, then we want to play our regular animation. So first, let's actually make a hide inspector public character animator manager variable up here. Let's call that an awake because we haven't yet, so we can access our character animator manager. And then we're going to simply say character animator manager, and we're going to access a function we've already made and used. It's play target action animation. And then we're going to call our new death or dead animation, so dead01 for me. And then we're going to say true because we are performing an action. Also, in the future, you can make a list of random death animations. You can make it randomly select one if you wanted to, but to keep things simple right now, let's just make it 1. We can come back and add more or polish that later. And if you want to, you can play some death sound effects. Like I have like kind of a heartbeat sound that plays in Nephilim when you die. It's also audible to other characters because this is outside the is owner. So when this death event is ran on the server, if you're close to the character that dies, you can hear it. Let's then make a yield return new wait for seconds, about 5. And then we want to make some pseudocode for award the player or players runes on death. So when an AI dies, for example, you get runes after you kill it. You wait for the death animation to play, and then you award the runes. And also then you can disable the character model, which we'll add when it makes sense to, because right now it's not really necessary. So that's some pseudocode there if you want to go ahead and implement those features yourself. But let's actually get to the more important stuff for now. Let's go to the character network manager and current health right here. We want to make basically a check whenever it's changed. So we're going to utilize on value changed. I'm going to make a public void I'm just going to call this check for HP. Actually, we just call it check HP because there's a couple things we can do here as well. We can also make sure we're not over healing. So we'll just call it check HP. Let's change current health from a float to an int because I honestly meant to make it an int and I just didn't do that. Stamina, and this is totally preference. If you want to keep it a float, you can just round it every time. But I'm definitely going to make it an int. Stamina, I like keeping as a float because there's a lot of weird stamina calculations where you could have a little bit over just one solid decimal. But I feel like health should always be represented as just a solid number. And again, this is totally preference. If you're not changing it, don't worry about this. There's only two places we got to change it though. So we got to go to set new health value, and you can see here it's asking for a float for an old value and a new value. Just change both of those to an int. And then I believe where we set our, we can get rid of this round to int here on set stat and health bar. We don't need to round that anymore. And we have one more place we need to change it over here. Go to the current character data. So go to your character save data file and change it from a float to an int here. Again, you don't need to do that. It's just preference for me. I really like having it as an integer. Now, back to the check HP function. We could say if our current health.value is less than or equal to 0, then we want to activate our new coroutine. So we just do that by saying start coroutine, and then we reference our character as in our character manager, and then we say process death event. Now you'll notice here it doesn't make me fill in this bool. That's because, like I said before, if we auto set it to false, you can set it to false or true here, but if you don't, it automatically selects false for you, which is very useful in a lot of circumstances. So right below that, we can say if character is owner, we want to, again, set our HP, if it's greater than our max HP, to the max value. This is useful for when we add the flasks. If you're healing, you don't want to be able to heal over your max. So it's going to check your HP, and it's going to see that, yes, it is definitely over your max value, so let's set it back to your max value. This prevents us from over healing. All right, now I'm just going to make a comment there as well, so it's very clear. Let's save that. Now what you want to do is go over to your on-network spawn. We actually want to call that new function for check HP, but we want to call it outside of the if is owner check because there's some functionality on the process death event coroutine we want to run for everybody. So outside of if is owner, we want to say player network manager dot current health dot on value changed, and then we say plus equals player network manager, and then we call our new function, which is just check HP. That's it. So let's save that, and now it should work. So let's go into the game and try it out. I'm going to start, load game, character, and now change my HP to 0, and yeah, we play the death animation. That's pretty cool. So you can see I just changed my current health in the player network manager to 0, and it ran the event. Excellent. Let's add a pop-up and a message to convey this so it's very, very clear. I mean, having your character follower is pretty clear, but let's make it more clear. Let's create an empty game object under the player UI manager. I'm going to call this pop-up manager. I'm going to hit stretch here so it's the full size of my canvas, and I'm going to kind of keep the same style here as my HUD manager. So I'm going to give it its own script, player UI pop-up manager. And this will handle things in the future like item pop-ups, warning pop-ups, other players that have joined your world pop-ups. This is going to be just the hub for sending your player messages via the UI. So let's put in our namespace and arrays to start and update functionality as is per tradition. And let's start by writing a simple header, and I'm going to call this udied, all caps, and then pop-up. So what do we need here? Well, we need to reference a game object that we enable and disable, so it's not always just in the scene running. And then we need to reference a couple of text pieces and then a thing called a canvas group. And if you don't know what a canvas group is, I'm going to explain that momentarily. So let's say using TM Pro, because again, we're going to use Text Mesh Pro for the text here. So I'm going to say Text Mesh Pro UGUI for the text. I'm going to call this udied pop-up. I'm going to call this background text, and I'll explain why in a second. And then we want the regular text, so the udied pop-up text. Why am I having a background text? Well, I find it gives it a cool contrast to make the background text a bit darker than the foreground text. And then we're going to stretch out the background text character spacing, so it looks like it's kind of moving. And lastly, you want a canvas group. And what does this do? Well, this allows us to tweak the alpha of every canvas object that's basically on this group, so we can fade it in and fade it out. So let's make a comment. Allows us to set the alpha to fade over time. So it's going to make it just look a little bit cooler, add a bit of polish to it. So right below all of that, we can make our public void for send player, or we can say send udied pop-up, because this is only going to be called if you are the owner and the host, and it's used dying. So we can make some pseudocode here. We want to activate post-processing effects if you have any. Let's say you want to flick something on when you die, like you want to change the screen black and white. That's kind of what I do in Nephilim. where you want to make like, you know, the bloom more present or less present, whatever you want to do. And then we're going to say udied.gameObject. We're going to set it to active true. And then we actually want to basically stretch the background text and fade in and then fade out the whole object. So we would just say character spacing here. We'd edit this, but I'm going to actually explain using a visual before we get too ahead of ourselves and before we write too much code. So let's make some pseudocode here. I want to stretch out the text and then just fade it in and out over time. So what am I referencing here with the character spacing? Well, as a lot of you probably would assume, you can actually edit the space between each of the characters in the text itself. So it looks like it's kind of wider. And that just gives it a cool, like, kind of like widening effect over time. So let's make this UI element first. Let's make an empty game object. I'm going to call it the UDIED pop-up. I'm going to stretch it so it's the entire size of the screen, then recenter it, and then I'm just going to make it like, you know, this little box. I'm going to tick my gizmos here so I can see the center of the screen. And yeah, that looks good. So let's actually create an image under this now. UI image. Let's stretch it so it's the size of the entire box. Untick raycast target so it's not using up memory because we're not needing to click this. Gonna make it all black and then make it really like, you know, kind of half invisible. And I think there's a cool button we can use here. So yeah, UI spray is kind of rounded off on the edges, which will make it look a little bit nicer. And just so we can see that more, I'm actually gonna make it not the whole width of the screen. That looks good. That's probably fine. And then I'm going to rename this to background. And then we're going to add a couple text elements. So right click UI, text mesh pro. Let's call this background text or UDIED background text or whatever. Set the font size to whatever, stretch it to the whole size of the pop-up. I'm going to center it both in the center of the screen and in the center by height. And then I'm going to make the color here like kind of like a darker red. I'm just going to put in all caps UDIED to see how that looks. Cool, looking good. We've only got 2 font selections here and they both appear to be identical, so we'll just stick with this for now. It's okay. Let's make it a bit darker because this one is the background version of the text. And let's fade it out quite a bit. Not too much though, but 92 looks fine. Just kind of playing it by ear here. Now you can mess with it if you want. Let's duplicate this and let's just call this text. And you know what? I don't like that. Let's call it pop-up text because that's not very descriptive. I'm going to call it UDIED pop-up text. I'm going to call this one UDIED background text. That is super descriptive, and I won't ever be confused at a quick glance at that. All right, so the foreground text, let's parent it under the background text, and let's make it much brighter and make the alpha like full. We want to fully be able to see this, and we can change the color to a brighter red. And now let's toggle auto spacing on both of these, or auto size, so it kind of fits your screen. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I like it. Let's make the character spacing like 9 on the background just so you can see. See how that has like this double effect now? It looks kind of cool. And over time, we're going to space it out even more so it appears like it's widening. And again, let's make the foreground color a lot brighter, and that does look good. Lastly, let's add a canvas object on the game object for this. Let's save this first so we can see our variables. Yes, we can drag in our background text here and our game object, UDIED pop-up, and our foreground text, and we don't have a canvas group yet, so let's go ahead and make one of those. I'm going to put it right on top of the UDIED pop-up game object, so just again search canvas group. Whoops, not canvas group, canvas. There it is. And you can see here, if I just mess with this alpha, see, you can fade in and out. So we can tweak this variable here and make it fade in. Let's keep it at 0 first, and let's also disable the UDIED pop-up game object. Make sure you drag in your canvas variable, and then let's save the player UI manager. Now, we can start writing some functionality. So we need 3 functions here, and 2 of them are enumerators. Actually, I think they might all be enumerators. So let's start by saying private enumerator. So coroutine, stretch pop-up text over time. Let's make it require a text mesh pro GUI for the text field, a float for the duration that you want to stretch. So we're going to say if duration is greater than 0, so if you call this without the duration being 0, then we're going to say text.character spacing is equal to 0. So let's reset it first. So it starts off at 0. So it's the same size as the foreground text. I'm just going to make a comment here so it just resets it, because if you call this function once and you don't reset it, then it will be initialized again at the previous amount that it got to when it ended. So you don't want that. So let's make a float for the timer. And then we're going to just simply say yield return null. And then we're going to use a while loop inside of here. And basically, we're going to check. So we're going to say, while our duration is less than our timer, we want to do something here, okay? So we're going to say timer is equal to timer plus time dot delta time. And then we're going to simply say text dot character spacing is equal to mathf.lerp, and we're going to lerp between whatever it is currently and then the required amount over a time period. So we actually want to make a variable for this. I'm going to say like 8.32, just a random number for now, but I'm going to give it its own variable. And for timer, we want to say duration times time dot delta time. But I'm going to divide that by like 20 because I want it to be like really slow. I don't want it to actually reach the ends of the screen before it starts fading out, if that makes sense. You don't have to do that. I just like doing it. I think it looks cool. Try both ways and see what you like better. So let's give this its own variable though for the spacing amount. And you can do the same thing for the delay if you want to, or like the time delay. So I'm going to say float stretch amount, and then I'm going to pass stretch amount here instead of 8.32. And then you can kind of pick how far you want it to extend across the screen. Okay, so next let's go up here and actually call this coroutine. We're going to say start coroutine, and then we're going to say stretch pop up over time. We're going to pass our background text, okay, not the foreground text, because that's the one you want to stretch. And then you're going to pass the duration, whatever you want it to be. I'm going to say 8 seconds. That sounds fine. And then the stretch amount, I'm going to, what did I say it was, 8.32. I'm probably going to increase that. I'm just using this number because it's what I use in Nephilim, but I think my text is a lot bigger and the font is different. So we'll probably increase that to something like 15 or 16. We'll see how it looks. All right, so next let's make the fade in pop-up. And all this one does is it fades in the entire object over a preset amount of time. So think about it this way. You're fading in at the same time as you're stretching the background text across the screen. And then you're waiting for a bit, and when it's all done, then you're going to fade out. That's all. Pretty simple. Break it down to its smallest parts. Think about it like that. So what do we require for this? Well, we only require a canvas group and the duration that you want to take for it to fully fade in. So we're going to say if duration is greater than 0, because you want to check. You don't want to even activate this if you have no duration at all. We're going to say canvas.alpha is equal to 0. So this just resets it in case you've already run this before or run a different function that's actually modified the alpha. And you can pretty much copy most of the logic here, except just kind of tweak it to use the canvas object. So I'm just going to type that again. We'll take it slow. Our timer is equal to 0. We're going to yield return null. And then we're going to say while our timer is less than our duration. And I made a mistake in the previous function because as I'm talking out loud now, I see that. So let's fix that. It should be up here if the timer is less than the duration, not if the duration is less than the timer. So while the timer is less than the duration, that's my bad. A lot of you probably caught that. So down here, we're going to say the same thing. We're going to say canvas.alpha is equal to mathflerp, and we're going to start with whatever we're at currently. So the canvas.alpha position, we want to get to 1 because that's fully present on the screen, not faded at all. We want to say by our duration times time dot delta time. And we also need to make sure we're incrementing our timer. So while this is true, then our timer is equal to timer plus time dot delta time. If you want to use shorthand, it would be plus equals time dot delta time. And then we're going to say canvas.alpha is equal to 1 outside this loop. And then we're going to say yield return null. Now we can call this one right now. So we can say start coroutine fade in pop up over time. We pass our canvas group and we pass our duration. You can see these coroutines too. If you ever want to use these for future pop-ups, you can. So think like great foe felled when you defeat a boss. You can use these exact same coroutines. You can use them for whatever message you want to convey in this style where it stretches across the screen and pops up. Maybe you activate a Site of Grace. You want to do it this way too. Perfect. Of course, Site of Grace being a checkpoint, just using that because the series is called Elden Ring and Unity, so I'm relating via the Elden Ring content. So next, we're going to make a private coroutine here, an enumerator, wait, then fade out pop-up over time. So what we want to do is wait for the full time it takes for our fade in to complete, and then fade it out. So we can copy canvas group and the duration. We can copy everything, but we want to add a delay. So copy everything inside your fade in pop-up over time. But instead of the alpha being 1, just change it to 0. And instead of initializing it at 0, initialize it at 1. Just the same, but the opposite. So right on top here, all we got to do is make a check for this delay. And what we're going to do is say while delay is greater than 0, we want to increment the delay. Delay equals delay minus time dot delta time. So when it hits 0, it's then going to run the code after, but it's going to wait. We want to say yield return null after this. It's important you always use a yield return null in these while loops. Otherwise, the functionality may not work as intended or even at all. So let's call this start coroutine, and then we're going to say wait, then fade out pop over time, pass our same canvas group, and then you want to make the delay whatever amount of time it is before the startup has finished. So in my case, we're going to make the duration 2, and we're going to make the delay 5 because the other one finishes after 5. Then we're going to save that. All right, so now let's call this send you died pop-up. So we're in the player manager here. Let's override our handle death coroutine or process death event coroutine. And now what you want to do is just place this here, but you can see we can't place it below right here because what you have here is code that's never going to be run because it's a coroutine and we're returning the base data, and it's green here signifying that it's never going to run. So if we call our player UI instance, we actually have to make a variable for this anyway, so let's do that. Let's go to our player UI manager and make a variable for our pop-up manager because we just created that script and I don't have a variable for it yet. So the player UI manager, much like the player manager, is the hub for all the player's UI elements, much like the player manager is the hub for all the player's elements. So like the player's animator, the player's effects manager, and the player UI manager is the hub for the HUD manager and the pop-up manager. So let's make a hide inspector because we don't need to see it. Let's make a public player UI pop-up manager so it can be referenced from other components in the UI. Let's say player UI pop-up manager equals get component in children, because if you made it like me, it rests on the game object of a child that is under the player UI manager. So next we can say over here, we can actually go back to the base here, and what you could do is copy all of the logic in here and then paste it instead on the player manager here, and then insert that wherever you want. But what we're going to do instead is actually just for now keep the base logic, and we're just going to position this if statement above it. But in the future, we're likely going to have to copy the logic because it's going to be segmented in different orders as opposed to an AI. It's going to have its own thing going on, but for now, don't worry about it. Just up here, if you are the owner, player UI instance.player UI pop-up manager send death pop-up. Now let's try it out. This should work unless I mess something up. So let's see. Let's go to the player and set their HP to 0, and it pops up, but it does not fade in. So I have made a mistake somewhere. Let's go back and look at what I've done. All right, so let's open up Visual Studios, and I instantly see the problem. I forgot to yield return in these loops. So let's just say yield return null, and that should fix the problem. I probably forgot in the other loops too, so I'm just going to copy it. So like I said before, you should always put these in the while loops, and yes, I forgot on probably every single loop. Down here, no, I didn't forget it on that one for the delay, but I forgot it down here too. So let's save that. That should go into every single loop, and now it should work. So now I'm going to minimize Visual Studios. And actually, you know what? First, let's make this stretch text over time. Let's make it like 19 or 20. I really want it to be noticeable that it's stretching, so let's just make sure it's working. Now if I go in here and I press 0 on the HP, boom, we die, and yes, you can see that text, see the background stretching out over time, and that to me gives it a cool effect, and then it fades out nicely. Looks nice and polished. You want to take it a step further, you can give it its own UI elements, like its own images for the background, maybe some new text. It can look really cool. So on network spawn, let's go over here, and again, this is on the player manager. We're just going to make a pseudocode here. In the future, we're going to check for all the players that are alive, and if there are 0 players that are on the cooperative team that are alive, we want to respawn all the players. So we're going to do that when it's going to call for it, and it will in the future very soon. But for now, we're going to make a header for a debug menu, which we can use to access quick actions while we're making the game. We're going to delete this, obviously, before the final build. Let's make a serializable bool for respawn character, initialize it of false. So let's make a function down here to handle some simple debug actions. Again, we'll delete this before the final version of the game, but it's very handy for testing. So private void debug menu is all I'm going to say. And in the future, if you guys want, I can make an actual UI for this, and we can make some developer tools that are handy for developing a project. But for now, all we need is something very simple, so let's keep it very simple. If respawn character equals false, and then we want to call a function to respond to our character. The function itself is not a debug function. It will be used in the future. So let's make it. Let's go to the base class so we can override it. Let's make a public virtual void revive character. And again, this can be used for everything from our AI to our character, depending on the circumstance. And what we're going to want to do is just override it. We're only going to write it for the player for now because we don't have AI, so let's not worry about the AI. Let's override revive character. What do we want to do here on revive character? Let's call it in our debug menu, revive character, and let's write some logic. So obviously we want to check if we are the owner because we are able to hit that debug menu icon on other game objects in our scene that aren't us. We don't want to be able to mess with other people's stuff. So let's say player network manager.current health value is equal to player network manager.max value, and do the same thing for your stamina. I say we don't want to mess with other people's stuff, but if we try to, it will give us an error. So this is why we have to check if we are the owner. So again, yeah, just reset your health to its max value, your stamina to its max value, your focus points to its max value. I'm just realizing we don't have focus points yet. So let's make a comment for that in the future, or mana, whatever you want to call it, the blue bar. And then right below that, let's make another line of pseudocode for any rebirth effects that you might want to play. And then let's play the empty animation to get us out of the dead animation. Let's make sure we're not performing an action so we have access to running around again and we're not locked into some frozen state. And that should work for now. That's really all we need for this point in the game. We will obviously add on to that. So let's make a debug menu, let's call it here rather, on the update function. And it should work. So let's save that. Now if you go into the game, hit load game, let's kill our character, this poor guy. And then after we've killed him, let's reset his health again. So let's say 0. Yes, death event plays, and then let's just give him some health again, and he should pop back up. So if we hit the revive character button, and there we go. Yeah, he's fine. Cool. So that is perfect for testing, and that is a death loop now. So now that we can actually kill our character and we can take damage, what we're going to start now is combat functionality. Now, if you guys want to start something else first, just let me know. But here's my plan moving forward. We're going to make our equipment system, and we're going to just basically beeline right for simple weapon equips. And from there, we're going to make it so we can fight the other character that connects to the server. And we're going to basically flesh out our damage system. So, for example, if you get hit from the left, you're going to be nudged to the right. If you get hit from behind, you'll be nudged forward. We're going to just basically round this out more and add more functionality, and also add in combat and incrementally increase the complexity and the functionality over time. I want to thank you as always for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you learned something today, or if you liked the content, I would greatly appreciate a like and a comment. I realize, again, I always sound like a broken record, but it genuinely helps out the series so much. As always, also, a special thank you to my patrons. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend. I will see you next week.